Mark, a retired Navy SEAL, and his wife Emily move into their dream neighborhood, only to be harassed by a ruthless HOA over petty violations. But things turn dark when two men posing as HOA police attack Emily on her own lawn. Mark's training kicks in. He takes them down with calm, precise force. Soon, the truth unravels. This wasn't about planter boxes. It was a criminal scheme by a corrupt developer using the HOA to scare families into selling. Instead of breaking, the neighborhood unites. Together, with Mark leading the charge, they expose the conspiracy. The ringleaders are arrested, peace returns, and the community proves that courage and unity are stronger than fear and greed. If you are enjoying the stories, please take a moment to like and subscribe to the channel. And now, let us begin the complete story. As Mark and Emily stood at the edge of their dream neighborhood, they couldn't shake off the feeling that something was not quite right. The towering oak trees surrounding them seemed to breathe a dark energy, as if they were aware of something hidden just beyond their line of sight. The sound of footsteps echoed through the quiet streets, growing louder with each step. Mark's heart pounded in his chest, and he tensed up, ready for whatever was about to happen. He had seen enough horror movies to know that a ruthless HOA was not above turning on its own residents to protect their interests. Suddenly, two men dressed as HOA police appeared out of nowhere, charging towards Emily's front yard. The moon hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the lawns and trees, making them look menacingly eerie. Mark quickly sprang into action, his muscles tensed with adrenaline. He raised a hand to shield himself from harm as one of the men lunged forward, his knife clashing against Mark's arm as he fought back. Emily gasped in shock, but also knew that she had no choice but to stand her ground. She drew her own weapon and aimed it at the man, ready for him to strike. The two men exchanged a tense exchange of blows, their weapons scraping against each other with an almost musical sound. As they continued fighting, Mark's training kicked in, guiding his hand through a series of precise strikes that sent both of them reeling back. Emily fought valiantly, her body struggling against the attacker's brute strength and speed. But the HOA police were relentless, determined to bring down their targets with an iron fist. The men began closing in on Mark, their voices raised in a deadly chorus as they launched themselves towards him. Mark's heart pounding with fear, he knew that his life was at risk. But then, out of nowhere, one of the HOA police lunged forward and tackled them both to the ground. They struggled for control, each trying to gain an advantage over their opponent. In a desperate bid to escape, Mark managed to grab Emily's ankle and pull her up into a crouch before he could be caught. He turned his attention back on one of the attackers, ready to deliver another blow as they lay prone on the ground. But just when it seemed like all hope was lost, something unexpected happened. The other man lunged forward from behind them, tackling Mark with an unyielding force that sent him sprawling to the side. Emily quickly caught hold of his leg and pulled him back, her own hand gripping his shirt tightly in a desperate bid for protection. With renewed strength, Mark fought back against the attacker, using all of his training and experience to keep them at bay. The HOA police hesitated for just a moment before launching another attack with their own weapons, but this time they were much more forceful than the first two attacks. As the final battle raged on, Mark's determination was tested to the limit. He fought with all his might, using every ounce of strength and agility he possessed to stay alive against the attacker's relentless assault. But in a moment of clarity, he realized that the true enemy wasn't the HOA police or the two men posing as them, but himself. His fear had blinded him to the truth about their plan, causing his judgment to be clouded by doubt and greed. Mark gritted out a deep breath, determined to regain control and reveal the real culprit behind this criminal scheme. With renewed courage, he launched one final strike at the attacker, using all of his training to deliver a powerful blow that sent them both crashing into the ground with a resounding thud. As Mark collapsed on the grill, N.D., exhausted but triumphant, he looked up at Emily and whispered in her ear. "You were right," she said softly. "Courage is stronger than fear, and it's never too late to change." Mark knew that his journey was far from over, but for now, he had proven that even a man who has been through the toughest of circumstances can overcome any obstacle with resilience and determination. As they stood there in the darkness, Mark looked up at the stars above them, grateful for their guidance and the chance to make amends. And as the last rays of sunlight began to fade into night, he knew that the world would never be the same again after his daring fight against evil. Mark and Emily had moved to their dream neighborhood after a successful career in the Navy SEALs. They had bought an old Victorian mansion on a hill overlooking the picturesque town, surrounded by lush greenery and breathtaking views of rolling hills and the ocean beyond. The peaceful environment was perfect for Mark's tranquility-seeking lifestyle, where he could escape the stress and chaos of his job as a counterterrorism expert. As they settled into their new home, Mark became increasingly vigilant about the neighborhood, constantly monitoring every sign of suspicious activity or potential threats. He knew that with just a few inches away from the front door, any intruder could cause alarm and potentially harm innocent residents. Emily was also aware of the dangers, but she had grown used to living in fear for her safety. One evening, while they were enjoying dinner at their favorite outdoor restaurant, Mark received an unexpected call from his former SEAL team about a group of armed men who seemed to be hiding in one of the nearby abandoned buildings. The message was cryptic and ominous, warning them that if they didn't take immediate action, chaos would ensue. Mark's heart raced as he realized the gravity of their situation. He knew that this wasn't just an ordinary case of harassment. There were deeper issues at play. It seemed like a group of ruthless individuals who had been exploiting the neighborhood for years to enrich themselves at the expense of its residents. Mark decided to investigate further, but before he could confront them face to face, two men posing as HOA police approached Emily on her own lawn. They were dressed in dark suits and carrying weapons, their faces covered with masks that obscured their identities. Without hesitation, Mark charged towards them, his training instincts kicking into action. The attackers fired a series of shots at him, leaving a trail of blood and chaos across the grassy lawn. Mark managed to dodge their bullets while delivering a powerful strike on one of them. The impact was so sudden and unexpected that both men stumbled backward as they lay lifeless on the ground. Mark's heart raced with adrenaline as he quickly assessed their condition. The attackers had been dressed in tactical gear, including body armor and boots designed for combat training. They seemed to have anticipated his approach and were well armed and coordinated. It was clear that these individuals weren't just after him. They were targeting Emily specifically. Mark knew that the only way to stop this criminal operation would be to confront them head-on. He pulled out a Swiss Army knife from his pocket, ready for any challenge. As he approached the attackers, their faces appeared distorted and emotionless, as if programmed to respond with deadly precision. "Who are you?" Mark demanded, his voice echoing through the quiet neighborhood. The attacker nearest him stood up, his eyes scanning the area before speaking in a cold, menacing tone. "We're here for Emily. We know her well." Mark's heart sank at their familiarity and knowledge of her past. He remembered the traumatic incident that had occurred on the day they moved into their new home, when he'd been stalked by an armed intruder while she was outside cooking dinner. "Emily," Mark replied calmly, "we need your help to stop these criminals from causing harm to anyone else in our neighborhood." The attacker hesitated for a moment before speaking more firmly. I understand that you're trying to protect her, but we have the resources and expertise needed to carry out this operation efficiently. We won't hesitate to use any means necessary to ensure that your neighbors are safe. Mark knew he had no choice. He closed in on them with renewed determination, his knife ready for action. As they engaged, in a tense exchange of fire, Mark's training instincts kicked into high gear. With each shot, he calculated the trajectory and aimed precisely at the attacker's chest or head, hoping to strike before it reached its target. The attackers' bodies were heavily armored, making them difficult to hit with conventional weapons. They fought back fiercely, using their weapons to evade Mark's attacks. In a desperate bid for survival, one of the attackers lunged forward and tackled Mark in a bear hug that left him momentarily stunned. Despite his injuries, Mark managed to hold on to the attacker's arm as they stumbled backward, dazed by the impact. The other attacker quickly regained control, pulling out their own weapon. Mark knew he had to act fast if he wanted to defeat them both and prevent any further harm from occurring in their neighborhood. With a fierce determination, he lunged forward again, using his knife to deliver multiple strikes on the attackers' heads as they fell to the ground with their throats sealed by sharp blades. The attack ended quickly, but not before Mark had left deep scars on one of the attackers' bodies. The two men lay motionless for a moment before regaining consciousness and collapsing onto the grassy lawn in stunned silence. Mark's heart pounded with relief as he realized that his actions had saved several lives, including Emily's. He knew that this was just the beginning of their journey to bring these criminals to justice. But for now, they were both out of harm's way. As the sun began to set over the neighborhood and darkness settled in once again, Mark and Emily sat together on the steps of their house, reflecting on their harrowing experience. They had faced unimaginable danger, but with each other by their side, they knew that anything was possible. For as long as he lived in this beautiful town, Mark would carry the memory of his bravery and determination to protect those who couldn't defend themselves. And while the world around them remained unchanged, he knew that his journey had only just begun, with a new chapter waiting for him on the horizon. Mark and Emily's dream neighborhood had always been a place of peace and tranquility, with lush green lawns, sparkling pools, and towering trees that seemed to reach towards the sky. But as they settled into their new home, they soon discovered that things were not what they initially thought. The HOA, Homeowners Association, was no stranger to controversy in this neighborhood, having been plagued by a string of violent incidents over the years. It had always taken the form of small-scale disputes involving noise complaints and parking issues. But one night, everything changed when two men dressed in all black and carrying flashlights approached Emily's front lawn at 10:30 p.m. They were armed with clubs and knives, their faces obscured by masks and hoodies. As they advanced toward the couple, Mark could hear their footsteps echoing through the quiet neighborhood, causing a stir among the neighbors who had been gathering in the street to watch what was about to happen. At first, Emily tried to back away from them, but her husband's quick thinking kept her at bay. He grabbed her arm and pulled her towards him, using his combat training to fight off their attackers with all he had left. "You're not going to stop now," Mark growled as the men continued to advance on Emily. "We have a warrant for your arrest." Emily tried to resist, but the threats were too strong. She felt fear rising inside of her, and she knew that they needed to take action if they wanted to protect themselves and their home. Mark pulled out his trusty .45 ACP pistol and aimed it at one of the attackers, who lunged forward with a knife in hand. The bullet struck him square in the chest, sending him flying backwards into an adjacent tree. Emily watched in horror as he lay motionless on the grass, but she knew that her husband was alive. The other attacker quickly caught up to Mark and pulled out his own weapon before they both fell to the ground. They exchanged a few blows back and forth with each other until one of them managed to disarm him. Emily rushed towards the attackers, screaming for help as they cowered in fear on the lawn. But just when she thought things couldn't get any worse, something unexpected happened. One of the attackers turned his weapon on her, hitting her in the face and causing a severe swelling that sent blood coursing down her cheek. Mark heard Emily's SCR. Aims before he managed to grab a nearby shovel from an unlocked shed and throw it at the attacker. The hit was deadly. The man stumbled backwards as if struck with a bolt of electricity, his eyes widening in shock as he fell to the ground. As she ran towards him, Emily could see that the wound had taken out some of his organs, leaving him vulnerable on the outside. Without hesitation, Mark rushed closer and grabbed onto the attacker's arm, pulling it back by the neck just enough for her to grab onto one of his legs. He twisted them together until he was able to force himself up off the ground, using all his strength to turn towards Emily with a fierce look in his eyes. "You're not going anywhere," Mark growled as he lunged forward. "We're coming after you both." The attackers were stunned for a moment before they turned their attention back on their attacker and launched another attack at him, striking him multiple times over the head with clubs and knives. Emily watched in horror as she saw her husband's body twitching violently before finally collapsing onto the grass. Mark rushed towards the attackers one last time, his eyes blazing with determination as he fought against them for every inch of space. He knew that this was their chance to bring justice to these ruthless men who had terrorized their neighborhood and left a lasting scar on its residents' psyche. As the sun began to set over the horizon and darkness settled in once again, Mark and Emily sat together on the steps of their house, reflecting on their harrowing experience. They were both shaken by what they had witnessed, but also grateful for each other's courage and resilience. "It's just one more day," Emily whispered as she looked out at the quiet neighborhood. "But we're not going to let these criminals get away with it." Mark nodded in agreement, his heart filled with pride that he was able to save their home from harm and bring justice to those who had been victims of their actions. As they sat there, Mark couldn't help but think about all the other people out there who were struggling to survive in a world full of danger. He knew that as long as they remained vigilant and committed to protecting themselves and each other, the future was bright for them and everyone else like them. For as long as he lived in this beautiful town, Mark would carry the memory of his bravery and determination to protect those who couldn't defend themselves. And while the world around them remained unchanged, he knew that his journey had only just begun, with a new chapter waiting for him on the horizon. Mark and Emily had moved into their dream neighborhood in the small town of Millfield, nestled between rolling hills and lush green forests. The neighborhood was known for its peaceful atmosphere, tree-lined streets, and stunning architecture that showcased a blend of old-world charm with modern technology. However, not everyone shared Mark's appreciation for the quietness. One day, as they were walking their dog in the park nearby, they heard a commotion on one of the lawns. The couple looked up to see two men dressed in police uniforms standing outside, holding flags and badges. They didn't recognize them at first, but after seeing their menacing presence, Mark realized that they might have been posing as HOA police. Emily's heart raced with fear, knowing that these were not the usual law enforcement agents she had encountered before. The men approached Emily on her lawn, demanding to know why she was there. Emily tried to explain that they lived in a peaceful neighborhood and wanted to ensure their safety by taking some precautions. But as she spoke, Mark could sense something off about them. Their demeanor was not the friendly or professional police officers he had known before. The two men's faces twisted with anger and frustration, each making threatening gestures towards Emily. They were armed with guns and knives, ready for a fight if necessary. "We're here to protect our community," one of the men sneered, raising his weapon in an attempt to intimidate Mark. "You cannot expect us to just stand by while these criminals terrorize your neighborhood." Emily's heart sank as she realized that they were dealing with individuals who had been involved in a violent conflict before. She knew that their actions could have serious consequences for those affected and the entire community, but she also couldn't help feeling scared. Mark took a deep breath, reminding himself of his training and experience as a SEAL. He knew that he was equipped to defend themselves and Emily if necessary. "We need you," he said firmly, drawing on his years of service in the military to calm their fear and regain control over the situation. The two men exchanged hostile glances before turning towards Mark and Emily, ready for a confrontation. But just as they were about to attack, something unexpected happened. A figure emerged from the bushes, dressed entirely in black and wearing high-tech gear that blended seamlessly with his surroundings. It was their former neighbor, who had been living on the outskirts of Millfield but had recently moved back into town due to an unforeseen tragedy that occurred there. The stranger stepped forward, holding a device in his hand like a weapon. "I'm here because you are not welcome," he said, brandishing the device at Mark and Emily with a fierce determination. Mark's heart raced as he recognized this man from their past encounters. It was Jack, one of the locals who had been involved in several violent conflicts years ago. He had managed to escape justice by hiding away during those events, but had now decided to take matters into his own hands. The two men exchanged a knowing glance before turning towards Jack, ready for a confrontation once again. But this time, things were different. Jack's weapon was not an ordinary device. It was equipped with advanced sensors and artificial intelligence that allowed him to analyze the environment around them in real time. With each step he took, his technology detected various threats and vulnerabilities on Mark and Emily's property. Using these insights, Jack identified a weakness in their security system and used his unique hacking abilities to exploit its vulnerabilities. He quickly disabled the alarm system, rendering it unable to detect any unusual activity or intruders within the neighborhood. Mark watched with awe as he realized that Jack had anticipated their moves and was prepared for whatever they might throw at him. "You are not welcome here," Jack growled, his voice filled with anger and frustration. As Mark stood there frozen in fear, a strange energy seemed to emanate from Jack. It was like an electric current coursing through his body, causing his muscles to tense up and his eyesight to sharpen. Suddenly, the two men exchanged a knowing glance once again before turning towards each other. They knew that they were no match for Jack's advanced technology and would need all their wits to escape this dangerous situation. But just as everything seemed lost, something unexpected happened. A group of local teenagers had been wandering through the park earlier in the day, looking lost and confused. As they stumbled upon Mark and Emily on their lawn, one of them noticed the strange device that Jack was holding in his hand and approached him with a concerned expression. "Hey guys, what's going on?" the teenager asked, approaching the two men. As they looked at each other, it became clear that this group had somehow stumbled onto a weapon operation. They were part of an organization known for their involvement in secret projects and covert activities, all under the radar. The teenagers listened to Jack's explanation about his mission against Mark and Emily, feeling both shocked and intrigued by what they knew about these individuals' past. One of them approached Jack with a curious smile on her face. "I see you've got a lot of gadgets around here," she said, pointing towards Jack's device. Jack chuckled playfully, explaining that it was not an ordinary gadget, but one designed to detect and disrupt the signals sent by enemy devices or surveillance systems. The teenagers nodded in understanding, sensing the potential danger that this technology could pose to their own community. They knew that if they were caught using such weapons, they would face severe consequences, including imprisonment or even worse. Realizing his error, Jack quickly turned around and grabbed Mark's arm tightly. "I didn't know you had a secret weapon operation here," he said, looking concerned for the safety of their friends. Mark felt a surge of anger as he realized that Jack was not only using this technology against him, but also against them all, to protect his own interests at any cost. With renewed determination and a fierce sense of urgency, Jack explained his plan. He revealed that they were part of an organization called the Shadow Net, which had been working on a dangerous project for years, developing advanced weapons capable of detecting and neutralizing electronic threats. Jack knew that this was no small task. It would require expertise in various fields such as cryptography, signal processing, and cyber warfare. But he also believed that they were doing the right thing by protecting their community from harm. The teenagers listened intently to Jack's explanation, feeling a mixture of awe and confusion at his boldness and dedication. They had never heard about this secret organization before, but knew that they needed to be careful. "We need to tell the authorities," one of them said, pointing towards Mark and Emily. Mark hesitated for a moment, considering their safety and the potential consequences if he revealed their involvement with the Shadow Network. But then he remembered Jack's words, "We're not going to let these criminals get away with it." And so, without hesitation, Mark shared his knowledge about the Shadow Network with the teenagers. They listened carefully as they explained that their organization had been working on a project for years and was now ready to take action against those who threatened their community. With newfound courage and determination, Jack led them into an old warehouse on the outskirts of town, where they discovered the evidence needed to expose the Shadow Network and bring its leaders to justice. It wasn't an easy task. Mark had to navigate a labyrinthine network of secret rooms filled with advanced technology and weapons, while avoiding detection by their own security forces. As they worked together, Jack explained that each member of the Shadow Network was responsible for specific tasks, from gathering intelligence on potential threats to developing new weapons. He also revealed the organization's hierarchy, revealing a complex web of power structures and influence. Despite the danger involved, Mark felt a sense of satisfaction knowing that he had helped bring an end to a dangerous group that threatened their community at large. They knew they would face challenges in getting the Shadow Network brought down, but were confident that with Jack by their side, they could succeed. As they left the warehouse and made their way back into Millfield, Mark couldn't help but feel grateful for his wife Emily's unwavering support and bravery throughout this ordeal. Together, they had faced unexpected challenges and overcome them through determination and a shared commitment to protecting their community. In the end, the Shadow Network was brought down with their weapons, bringing justice to those who were targeted by Mark and Emily's enemy group. But even as they stood victorious on the streets of Millfield, the memory of this dangerous operation stayed fresh in everyone's minds, reminding them that danger lurks around every corner, but only if we're willing to face it head-on with courage, resilience, and a deep sense of purpose. For Mark, the Shadow Network had been just one chapter in his life. But now, he knew that there were countless other stories like this waiting for him, each filled with danger, intrigue, and the unexpected, all waiting for him to uncover them and make their mark on history as a fearless protector of those who needed it most. Mark, a retired Navy SEAL, and his wife Emily had moved into their dream neighborhood of Millfield. The quiet streets were lined with lush green trees that rustled in the gentle breeze as they walked to their new home on a warm spring afternoon. It was like stepping back in time to an idyllic era when life seemed simpler, more peaceful, and less fraught with danger. But things took a dark turn when Mark received a call from Emily's mother, who had been worried about her safety ever since she moved into Millfield. The older woman claimed that someone had broken into their house while they were out for dinner at the local restaurant, causing extensive damage to furniture and electronics. As soon as Emily returned home, she discovered that an intruder had gained access through a loose window and ransacked every room in the house. Mark rushed back inside and immediately called his team of investigators from the Shadow Network, one of the most elite special operations groups in the world. They quickly arrived on scene and assessed the damage before launching a thorough investigation into the incident. Emily's mother was interviewed about her encounter with the intruder, who had made off with several items that were worth millions of dollars. As they delved deeper into the case, Mark uncovered evidence linking the Shadow Network to an illegal drug operation in the neighborhood. The group was known for their ruthless tactics and willingness to go against anyone who dared oppose them, including local law enforcement agencies. However, as it turned out, the Shadow Network had been operating a secret warehouse deep within Millfield's outskirts, where they kept all of their most dangerous weapons and tools. Mark knew that he needed to act fast if he wanted to take down the organization before they could strike again. He immediately contacted his team and arranged for them to set up a surveillance operation at the warehouse, hoping to gather enough information about its layout, security measures, and potential targets. The team arrived on site early in the morning, armed with high-tech equipment and tactical gear. They quickly established a perimeter around the warehouse and began monitoring it from multiple angles using cameras and drones. As they worked their way through the building's labyrinthine network of passageways and rooms, Mark realized that the Shadow Network had been planning this operation for months. Inside the warehouse, they encountered an army of armed men wearing tactical gear, some carrying guns and assault rifles while others wielded knives and other cutting tools. The group was heavily guarded by a series of security cameras and motion sensors, which were constantly monitoring their every move. Mark led his team through the complex maze of the building, carefully evading detection as they searched for any leads or evidence that could help them take down the Shadow Network. They found several rooms filled with stacks of illegal drugs and equipment, including high-tech gadgets used in drug trafficking operations. Mark's heart raced when he saw a large case containing over 100 pounds of pure cocaine. As the team closed in on the warehouse, they encountered more security personnel who were equally equipped to protect their hidden hideout from any attempts by outsiders. The group fought valiantly against an army of armed men, using weapons and tactics honed during their time in service as Navy SEALs. In a desperate bid for survival, Mark ordered his team to use all the tools at their disposal to take down the Shadow Network. They quickly opened fire on the warehouse's security personnel, overwhelming them with bullets and shots. The group fought back fiercely, using advanced weapons and tactics that had been trained in specialized military combat. In a fierce battle inside the warehouse, Mark managed to capture one of the main targets, a heavily armed man who was responsible for coordinating the Shadow Network operations. With his life on the line, he turned over all information about their plans, including details regarding the location and layout of the secret hideout. Mark's team quickly secured the suspect and took him into custody while they continued to gather evidence against the organization. They discovered that the Shadow Network was not just a criminal gang, but also an international crime syndicate with operations in several countries around the world. As Mark worked tirelessly behind the scenes, he realized that his wife Emily had been right all along when she warned him about the dangers lurking in Millfield. The neighborhood had become a hotbed of organized crime and violence, where anyone could be targeted by ruthless hackers, cybercriminals, or even local law enforcement agencies. Mark knew that it was time to take action against this threat once and for all, but he also felt a deep sense of responsibility towards his community and the people who lived there. He called Emily's mother and explained his plans, asking her if she would be willing to help him expose the shadow network and bring them to justice. Together with Emily's support and encouragement, Mark launched an international manhunt for all members of the organization, using every available resource to track down their leaders and disrupt their operations. It was a long and grueling journey, filled with danger, intrigue, and unexpected twists and turns. As they pursued the shadow network through Europe, Asia, and even Africa, Mark knew that he had made a significant impact on the lives of countless individuals who had been affected by this dark force. He saw firsthand how their actions had brought hope to communities plagued by crime, violence, and poverty. In the end, Mark's efforts paid off as the shadow network was dismantled, leaving behind a trail of destruction but also bringing justice for those wronged. The neighborhood of Millfield became safer than ever before, thanks in part to Mark's bravery, determination, and unwavering commitment to protecting his community. As they stood victorious on the streets of Millfield, Mark knew that he had made a lasting impact not just on the lives of individuals, but also on society as a whole. He looked back at his life journey with pride, knowing that he had been part of something bigger than himself, and had helped bring about change in a world that was once plagued by darkness. For Mark, the Shadow Network was just one chapter in an ongoing story filled with danger, intrigue, and the unexpected twists and turns. But as he looked out over Millfield from his newly renovated home, he knew that there were countless other stories waiting for him, each filled with its own unique challenges, obstacles, and triumphs, all waiting to be uncovered. But no matter what lies ahead, Mark would always remember the lessons learned in the Shadow Network, a journey that had tested his courage, resilience, and commitment to protecting those who needed it most. For as he looked out over Millfield from his new home, Mark knew that the future held endless possibilities for him. One of them was to continue uncovering and exposing hidden crimes and injustice wherever they may be found, using his skills, knowledge, and unwavering spirit to make a difference in the world. Mark sat on his front porch, taking in the breathtaking view of Millfield's lush green trees and chirping birds. He had moved into this neighborhood a few months ago after selling all of his belongings from his previous home due to an offer that was too good to pass up. The streets were lined with beautiful homes, each one unique and tailored for its owner's taste, making the area feel like a small community rather than just a residential development. As he stood there, contemplating where this new chapter in his life would take him, Mark couldn't help but reflect on his past as a Navy SEAL. He had been part of Operation the Shadow Network, an elite group of military intelligence agents who had infiltrated and dismantled various criminal organizations, taking down their leaders and bringing them to justice for the crimes they committed. Back then, he had seen firsthand the power that these operations could have on a community. When Mark's team uncovered a high-level drug ring in Mexico, they were able to disrupt its supply chain and arrest the key figures responsible. The impact was immediate. Crime rates dropped across the country, public safety improved, and communities became safer. However, as he looked back at his own life, Mark couldn't help but wonder what would happen if he ever returned to Millfield after leaving the Navy. He had left behind a wife who had struggled with post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, due to their experiences during Operation the Shadow Network. Emily had always been there for him through thick and thin, supporting him in his mission as an intelligence agent and helping him find ways to cope with the emotional toll of his work. Now that they were living together again, Mark felt a newfound appreciation for the quiet moments spent outside, away from the hustle and bustle of daily life. As he watched the children playing on the playground or listened to the birds chirping in the trees, he realized how much peace and tranquility Millfield offered him. He knew that this was where he wanted to live, surrounded by nature's beauty and the people who loved them. However, as Mark sat there, feeling a sense of longing for what he had left behind, something unexpected happened. A group of men approached his front door with masks on their faces, claiming to be representatives from the Millfield Homeowners Association, HOA. They introduced themselves as HOA police and explained that they were investigating some minor violations in Mark's yard. At first, Mark was skeptical, thinking it might just be an innocent misunderstanding. But when he saw the men holding a clipboard with their names on it and carrying out what seemed like a checklist of items to mark off his property for violation, Mark knew something was not right. He quickly grabbed his phone and he called his wife. "Emily," he said, feeling a mixture of concern and determination as he spoke over the line. "There's been some trouble in Millfield today. The men from the HOA have come out to our house and are accusing me of minor violations." With no hesitation, Emily quickly responded, her voice calm but firm. "Mark," she said, "I've seen everything that you're describing. These guys are not just making up stories. They were following us around today while we went on a walk with the kids, and they even tried to intimidate our son." Despite her fear, Mark knew he couldn't ignore their claims. He gathered his things together and headed over to the HOA office, determined to clear his name and defend himself against these false accusations. As he arrived at the building, the men were waiting for him inside. They introduced themselves as members of a local law enforcement agency and explained that they had received an anonymous tip about Mark's involvement in some illegal activities. After conducting their investigation, the officers discovered that there was indeed evidence to support Emily's claims, including stolen property from one of the homes on Millfield streets. At first, the HOA officials tried to negotiate with Mark, hoping that he would confess and admit his wrongdoings in exchange for a lenient sentence. But as they spoke, it became clear that these men were not interested in negotiating or finding a solution. They only wanted to take down Mark by any means necessary. Mark knew that if the HOA went through with their threats, it could result in him losing everything he had worked so hard for, including his reputation and his life. So, instead of giving up, he decided to fight back against these men and stand up for what was right. As the officers walked over to Mark's house to confront him, they began a tense standoff that left Mark feeling cornered and vulnerable. But despite their attempts to intimidate him, Mark refused to yield to their demands. He stood his ground, using every ounce of strength he had in him to protect himself and Emily from harm. In the end, it was Mark who emerged victorious. The officers were arrested for their illegal activities and were brought before a judge, who ruled that they would be held accountable for their actions. As the courtroom filled with tension and anticipation, Mark stood up, his voice shaking but firm. "I am not guilty of any charges," he said in a calm tone. "I have no intention of confessing or engaging in illegal activities. I simply wanted to protect my wife from harm and clear her name." The judge listened intently as Mark explained the events that had unfolded on Millfield streets, his words painting a vivid picture of the danger they posed for both him and Emily. As he looked into Mark's eyes, the judge nodded in understanding. "You have shown courage and integrity," the judge said, his voice filled with compassion and respect. "You did not let your fear or desperation take over, and instead chose to stand up against these men who sought to harm you." With a sense of relief washes over Mark as he listens to the judge's verdict, knowing that justice had been served and his wife would be safe once again. As they left the courthouse, Emily hugged him tightly, tears streaming down her face. "You did it," she whispered, breathless with emotion. "Thank you for standing up against these men and protecting us from their harmful actions." Mark smiled at her, feeling grateful for the love and support of his family in this difficult time. He knew that he still had many challenges ahead, but one thing was certain. No matter what obstacles lay ahead, he would continue to fight for justice, using his skills as a Navy SEAL and his unwavering commitment to protecting those who needed it most. With the lights dimmed across Millfield, Mark sat back on his porch once again, reflecting on the challenges that had been faced in this new chapter of his life. But with each passing day, he knew that he was closer than ever to achieving his goals and making a difference in the world. For as he looked out over Millfield from his home, Mark realized that the Shadow Network would continue to be a part of him, forever marking his journey through danger, intrigue, and the unexpected twists and turns of life, one case at a time. Mark, a retired Navy SEAL, and his wife Emily had moved into their dream neighborhood in Millfield years ago. They lived there with their 2 children, who were now teenagers, and an elderly mother-in-law they had met at the community center. The neighborhood was known for its quiet streets, well-manicured lawns, and friendly residents. But as time went on, Mark began to notice that something strange had been happening around his home. One day, while walking through their front yard with Emily, he heard a noise coming from one of the nearby houses. He approached cautiously, expecting to see someone having trouble mowing their lawn or fixing some small issue. However, when he got closer, he saw 2 men standing at the door, holding a sign that read, "HOA Police." Their faces were menacing and cold, with a sense of aggression in every move. Mark knew immediately what was happening. These weren't ordinary police officers. They had dressed up as HOA staff members to intimidate residents into silence over minor violations like not cleaning up after their pets or fixing broken garage doors. The HOA had been using intimidation tactics for years, trying to control the neighborhood's growth and prevent any development that might challenge its authority. Emily was scared but determined to protect her family from these men. She grabbed Mark's hand and pulled him towards the house, asking if he knew anything about what they were doing. He hesitated at first, knowing how much it would anger the HOA owners, who had a history of retaliating against anyone who dared challenge their authority. Mark eventually revealed that he was part of a small group of former Navy SEALs who formed an organization called the Shadow Network to help protect vulnerable individuals and communities. They worked together to gather intelligence on threats from criminal organizations, such as drug dealers, gang members, and other violent criminals. However, the HOA had become aware of their activities and were determined to shut them down. As Mark explained his plan to confront the men in front of their house, Emily listened with concern, but also admiration for her husband's bravery. She knew that he was risking everything by stepping up against a powerful organization that threatened not only her own life, but that of countless others who lived on Millfield. The 2 men approached the door hesitantly, each holding a weapon in their hands. They looked directly at Mark and demanded to know why his group had been targeting them. The Shadow Network members were confident in their training and experience, but they also knew that these weren't easy targets to catch without proper evidence or support. Mark stood tall and straightened his uniform, brandishing his trusty sidearm. "We're here to protect you," he said firmly. "You have no rights to defend yourself against us." The men hesitated for a moment before nodding in agreement. They lowered their weapons and stepped back towards the door, looking at each other with wary eyes. "Okay, but we can't let this go unchallenged," one of them growled. "We're not afraid to bring you down if it means stopping these criminals." Mark's heart sank as he realized that they were willing to use violence and intimidation tactics to silence him and his team. He knew that their actions would have serious consequences, both for the victims in this case, but also for the safety of all residents who lived on Millfield. But Mark was not one to back down easily. "We've faced our fair share of challenges," he replied, "but we know what it takes to protect those who need us most." With that, he stepped forward and took a deep breath, his hands gripping the door handle with determination. He knew that this was their opportunity to stand up for justice and make a difference in Millfield. The two men hesitated once again before finally approaching him. They looked at each other with cold eyes, but Mark could see that they were willing to listen. "We understand your concerns," one of them said, "but we can't just silence you and walk away without taking action." Mark nodded in agreement, knowing that this was the only way to protect himself and his family from these criminals who had taken their own lives for granted. With a deep breath, Mark stepped back inside and turned on the lights around the house. The two men watched him go before closing the door behind them. As he stood there, looking out over Millfield with a sense of pride and satisfaction, Mark knew that this was just one challenge in his long journey as part of the Shadow Network. But for now, he had proven himself capable of standing up to those who threatened the safety of the community he loved. From that day forward, Mark continued to work alongside Emily and other members of the Shadow Network, using his training and experience to protect vulnerable individuals and communities from harm. He knew that their fight would not be easy, but with each passing day, he felt more confident in his ability to make a difference. For as he looked out over Millfield once again, Mark realized that the Shadow Network would always be a part of him, forever marking his journey through danger, intrigue, and the unexpected twists and turns of life, one case at a time. Mark, a retired Navy SEAL, and his wife Emily had always dreamed of living in the idyllic neighborhood of Millfield, nestled at the foot of rolling hills and surrounded by lush greenery. However, as they moved into their dream home with excitement, Mark quickly realized that life was not without its challenges. One day, while out on a walk along their front lawn, he received an unexpected visit from two men dressed in black suits who claimed to be representatives of the Millfield HOA, Homeowners Association. They approached him and began asking questions about his home's landscaping practices. As Mark tried to explain that they were simply trying to maintain the property, one man stepped forward and revealed himself as a masked intruder. "Mr. Mark," he said menacingly, "I have reason to believe you are involved in illegal activities." He handed over an evidence tape containing footage of his wife's lawn being tampered with. The other man nodded in agreement, adding that they had also discovered documents related to a supposed theft from the property. As the two men left, Mark couldn't help but feel a sense of panic wash over him. The next day, he received another visit from these same HOA police, who claimed they were investigating an unrelated incident on Emily's neighbor's lawn. They demanded that she turn over information about her husband's involvement in a suspicious activity and provided them with a warrant for his arrest based on the evidence tape. Feeling increasingly violated by this relentless pursuit, Mark decided to take matters into his own hands. He went through the motions of filling out an official police report and submitting it to the local authorities, but he knew that there was no guarantee that they would believe him or even investigate further. As time passed, Emily found herself becoming more paranoid about her safety in Millfield. The HOA police continued their harassment, leaving Mark feeling isolated and alone in his home. He started receiving threatening letters and phone calls from the masked intruders, warning him of his impending arrest if he didn't comply with their demands. Despite these relentless threats, Mark refused to back down. He knew that this was not about protecting himself or Emily. It was a fight for justice against those who had violated their rights and threatened them with violence. With each passing day, the lines between law enforcement and vigilant citizens like him became increasingly blurred. In addition to his own investigations, Mark also joined forces with other members of the Shadow Network, a group dedicated to protecting vulnerable individuals and communities from harm. They formed an alliance based on shared experiences, mutual trust, and unwavering commitment to fighting against injustice and oppression. As the HOA police continued their relentless pursuit of Mark, he knew that they would stop at nothing to capture him. He had no choice but to remain vigilant and stay one step ahead of them. The Shadow Network provided a sense of camaraderie and support in this dangerous game, as everyone worked together to protect those who couldn't defend themselves. Mark's determination and resourcefulness proved instrumental in his survival against the relentless attackers. With their help, he managed to evade capture several times before being caught by one of them at a crucial moment. He was taken into custody without incident and presented to the Millfield Police Department for questioning. The evidence tape provided by Emily had led to an investigation that revealed the true extent of Mark's involvement in illegal activities, including drug trafficking, money laundering, and even extortion. The charges against him were severe, with multiple counts of conspiracy, theft from a public property, and witness tampering. In court, Mark faced his accusers with pride and determination, sharing evidence and testimonies that proved his innocence once again. He argued that the HOA police had framed him based on false information and motives, and he was entitled to defend himself against their malicious accusations. The trial lasted several weeks as lawyers cross-examined witnesses, presented arguments from both Mark's side, and even summoned other individuals who could provide additional evidence in his favor. Despite the intense pressure, Mark remained calm and composed throughout the proceedings. After a long and grueling legal battle, the jury found him guilty on all charges and sentenced him to prison for 5 years. As he walked out of the courthouse that day, Mark couldn't help but feel a sense of relief wash over him. He had stood up against injustice and been vindicated in his fight for freedom. However, this victory came at great cost. The shadowy organization behind the Shadow Network was aware of his conviction and decided to take matters into their own hands once again. They began targeting Mark with even more aggressive tactics, sending him covert missions around the country and spreading rumors about his whereabouts. Mark knew that he could no longer survive in this dangerous game alone. He joined forces with other members of the Shadow Network, including former military officers who had been personally affected by their organization's activities. Together, they worked to protect Mark from these relentless attackers, using their combined skills, knowledge, and resources to dismantle the criminal network. The team quickly identified several key figures within the Shadow Network, each with a unique skill set and background in law enforcement or military operations. They also formed an intelligence unit that gathered intelligence on their targets' movements and activities, giving them valuable insights into their plans for revenge. As they worked together to dismantle the criminal network, Mark's determination and bravery were put to the test. He faced numerous challenges along the way, including being blackmailed by corrupt officers within his own agency and having to navigate treacherous legal waters. Despite these obstacles, the Shadow Network continued to fight against injustice with unwavering conviction. They exposed corruption at multiple levels of government, providing evidence that these powerful figures were responsible for a litany of crimes and abuses against vulnerable individuals. As the team made their way back into the shadows, they faced new challenges every day, but they never lost sight of their mission to protect Mark and bring down the Shadow Network, once and for all. The legal battle was far from over, as more evidence continued to surface that implicated key figures within the organization in a series of high-profile cases. Mark knew that his journey had only just begun, but he was determined to continue fighting until justice was served. He would never stop chasing down those responsible for these injustices and ensuring that their days were numbered. As they prepared themselves for another round of attacks from the Shadow Network, Mark looked out over Millfield once again, grateful for the community's unwavering support during his darkest moments. With each passing day, he knew that his fight against oppression was far from over, but with a deep sense of determination and resilience, he would continue to push back against those who sought to silence him and make him an outcast in their twisted world. The end Mark, a retired Navy SEAL, and his wife Emily, had always been drawn to the serene atmosphere of Millfield. The community was nestled in the heart of the city's residential district, surrounded by lush greenery and well-manicured lawns, making it an ideal place for families looking to escape the hustle and bustle of urban life. But their move into this neighborhood proved to be far from smooth sailing when they discovered that the Homeowners Association, HOA, was taking a hard line against them due to violation charges related to small infractions. These allegations were based on Mark's unwavering commitment to serving his country, and he found himself at odds with the board of directors and their relentless pursuit of enforcing strict rules and regulations that had little impact on actual neighborhood behavior. As tensions mounted between Mark and the HOA escalate, two individuals pretending to be police began targeting Emily. On one fateful day, while she was tending to her garden, a group of masked men showed up at her doorstep, claiming they were representatives from the association. They approached Emily with an ominous warning that if she continued to challenge their authority or questioned any perceived violations within the community, she would be subject to immediate eviction. Emily's heart raced as she tried to remain calm and composed in such a stressful situation. She knew that raising objections about the HOA's policies could lead to legal trouble, but also feared for her safety, as these masked men seemed intent on silencing her voice altogether. As they demanded proof of their authority, Emily quickly realized that these individuals were not just after her garden. They had a larger plan in mind. With renewed determination and quick thinking, she began gathering evidence against the HOA police team, uncovering key details about their activities and connections with other high-profile cases within the community. As the investigation unfolded, it became clear that one of the men was linked to a group known as the Shadow Network, a mysterious organization responsible for various crimes in Millfield. Mark knew that his journey had only just begun when he received an anonymous tip about the Shadow Network's involvement with his case. He immediately reached out to local law enforcement agencies, who began investigating and gathering evidence against the individuals posing as HOA police. As the team dug deeper into the Shadow Network's activities, they discovered a web of interconnected crimes that spanned multiple states. From small infractions like parking violations to more serious cases involving theft, drug trafficking, and extortion, Mark knew that he was up against something much bigger than just his own neighborhood. A powerful criminal organization with connections to high-ranking government officials and influential figures. Mark's investigation led him on a dangerous path, as the team uncovered evidence of the Shadow Network's involvement in a series of high-profile cases involving prominent political leaders. One particularly shocking revelation was that one of their key members had ties to an international drug trafficking ring that operated across multiple countries. This realization shook Mark to his core and forced him to confront his own moral compass, as he realized the extent to which the Shadow Network's activities were compromising innocent people's lives and causing chaos within Millfield. He knew that it was time for action to be taken against this powerful criminal organization before their actions had any further impact on the community. In a series of coordinated raids and arrests, Mark led his team in an intense battle with the Shadow Network, engaging in intense hand-to-hand combat and utilizing all available resources to take them down one by one. They faced multiple setbacks and obstacles along the way, but their unwavering determination and relentless pursuit of justice proved to be too much for the organization's leaders. In a stunning turn of events, Mark managed to rescue Emily from the Shadow Network's grasp just as they were about to execute her on the lawn. With his quick thinking and exceptional skills in martial arts, he was able to distract them long enough for himself and Emily to escape unharmed. As she looked back at him with a newfound appreciation for their relationship, Mark knew that this victory would not only bring peace to Millfield, but also pave the way for a brighter future where justice could be served for all residents. With the Shadow Network behind bars and many of its members facing legal consequences, the community was left to pick up the pieces from Mark's remarkable journey. He had become an icon in the fight against crime and corruption, inspiring others to stand up for what they believe is right, even when faced with seemingly insurmountable obstacles. As he looked out over Millfield once again, Mark knew that his work was far from complete, but also grateful for the support of his community and countless individuals who had stood by him throughout their fight against oppression. He promised to continue working towards a safer future where justice could be served not just for himself and Emily, but for all residents. The end Mark sat in his backyard, staring out at the sprawling community of Millfield. The sun was setting on a day that had been both challenging and rewarding for him as he reflected on the events leading up to his latest mission. He had retired from the Navy SEALs after spending over 15 years serving overseas, but never in this neighborhood. He had moved there with Emily, their 2 children, to start anew and build a life where they could finally live off of their savings and leave behind the stress of military service. The Millfield community was known for its tight-knit atmosphere, strict rules, and unwavering dedication to maintaining order and harmony. However, when Mark arrived on his new property, he found that things were not what he had expected. The neighborhood's HOA, led by a gruff and unapproachable man named Mr. Thompson, was constantly on the lookout for any perceived violations, no matter how small or insignificant they seemed. These offenses ranged from minor noise complaints to more serious violations like littering or parking in restricted areas. At first, Mark tried his best to ignore these issues and stay within the rules of the HOA's regulations. He was a seasoned veteran with years of experience under his belt, and he knew how to navigate through any situation that presented itself. But as time went on, it became increasingly clear that something was off about Mr. Thompson's tactics. One evening, Mark received an email notification from the Shadow Network, the organization responsible for maintaining law and order in Millfield, informing him of a potential violation against their property by Emily's neighbor. They had found evidence of illegal drug use in the backyard, including a small amount of methamphetamine that was hidden among some plant material. Mark knew he couldn't simply ignore this issue without consequences, but as an experienced SEAL, he also recognized his role in maintaining order within the community. He quickly organized a meeting with Mr. Thompson and the Shadow Network's lead detective to discuss the matter further. In the meeting, Mark presented evidence from the investigation and explained how the methamphetamine was discovered. Mr. Thompson listened intently, but remained dismissive, pointing out that it would be impossible for such an amount of drugs to have been used without a direct connection to Emily or her neighbors. Mark knew he had to do something to get the Shadow Network's attention before they escalated this issue further and potentially harm innocent residents. He suggested reaching out to local law enforcement agencies to work together on the investigation, as well as involving his own contacts within the military community who might have information about similar cases in other neighborhoods. However, Mr. Thompson was hesitant at first, citing concerns over the Shadow Network's reputation for engaging with controversial issues and potentially alienating members of the community they served. Mark explained that he understood their perspective, but also believed that collaboration would be more effective than going against them head-on. In a rare compromise, Mr. Thompson agreed to meet with both the Shadow Network and local law enforcement agencies at a mutually convenient time in order to discuss the situation further. He assured them that he was committed to finding a solution that respected all parties involved and prevented any potential harm to innocent residents. The next day, Mark and Emily attended the meeting arranged by Mr. Thompson, along with their children, the Shadow Network's lead detective, and local law enforcement officials. They arrived at the conference room, dressed in crisp suits and ties, and each member of the team took turns presenting their findings. Mr. Thompson acknowledged that there were valid concerns about the methamphetamine found on Emily's property, but emphasized that it was not a sign of criminal activity or an indication of drug addiction. He pointed out that many people use drugs for legitimate reasons such as medical conditions, personal growth, and creative expression, and that these individuals would likely have no access to illegal substances. The Shadow Network's lead detective shared their analysis of the case, highlighting the potential connections between the Shadow Network, Emily's neighbors, and the methamphetamine. They revealed that some residents had reported suspicious behavior towards Emily in recent weeks, including a series of visits from unknown men who appeared out late at night and left trash scattered around her property. Mr. Thompson acknowledged these concerns, but emphasized that there was no evidence to support any criminal activity or motive for the drug use on Emily's behalf. He explained that the Shadow Network had not taken part in any illegal activities, nor did they have a history of targeting specific individuals, including residents with medical conditions or personal struggles. With this clarification and additional information provided by law enforcement officials, Mr. Thompson was able to reframe his previous position and approach the situation more objectively. They agreed to conduct further investigations into Emily's neighbors' behavior, including reviewing their backgrounds, speaking with them directly, and gathering any relevant evidence that could help shed light on the issue. As they prepared for this new phase of the investigation, Mark knew he had a crucial role in ensuring its success. He reached out to his fellow SEALs within the Shadow Network and suggested creating a team dedicated solely to assisting Emily's neighbors with their concerns. The Shadow Network agreed, and together they formed the Millfield Neighbor Support Group, MNSG. This group was made up of residents who had previously expressed interest in addressing issues related to noise complaints, littering, and other non-criminal behaviors within Millfield. They were committed to providing support, guidance, and resources to help Emily's neighbors overcome any challenges they faced and restore the peaceful environment that they cherished. As the MNSG began their work, Mark and Emily worked closely with them to gather feedback from their members about potential solutions and strategies for addressing these issues. They encouraged residents to report any suspicious behavior or concerns they had in a constructive manner, rather than resorting to confrontational methods like filing complaints with the Shadow Network. The group also organized community events and workshops where residents could learn about noise reduction techniques, waste management practices, and other ways to improve their quality of life within the neighborhood. They worked together to create an open dialogue platform that allowed all members of the community to voice their concerns and perspectives openly. Over time, the Shadow Network's involvement in the Millfield Neighbor Support Group began to grow, with more residents joining forces against common issues they had been experiencing for years. By working closely with local law enforcement agencies and providing support to Emily's neighbors, Mark and his team were able to bring about positive changes within the community that not only improved its overall well-being, but also strengthened their bonds as a family. As the Shadow Network continued to monitor developments in the case, They received new information from local law enforcement officials indicating an increase in drug-related activity among some of Emily's neighbors. They quickly launched additional investigations into these areas and uncovered more evidence linking them to illegal activities. In one particularly noteworthy discovery, a group of individuals who had been living near Emily for years began reporting incidents of harassment and intimidation towards her, including verbal abuse and physical threats. The Shadow Network's lead detective recognized that this was the direct result of their previous efforts in addressing concerns about drug use within the community and working to bring together neighbors with similar experiences. To address these growing issues head-on, Mr. Thompson led a joint investigation into the harassment allegations against Emily's neighbors. They discovered that some individuals had been using threats and intimidation tactics to silence those who dared to challenge their views or opinions on matters of personal autonomy within the neighborhood. Realizing the severity of this issue, the Shadow Network worked closely with local law enforcement agencies and community organizations to develop a comprehensive plan for addressing these crimes. This included providing training sessions and resources for residents on how to report harassment allegations in a safe and effective manner, as well as offering legal assistance to those who were targeted. The Shadow Network also launched an awareness campaign aimed at reducing the prevalence of hate speech and promoting respect within the community. They engaged with local schools, youth groups, and religious organizations to educate young people about the harmful effects of bullying, discrimination, and prejudice on individuals' mental health and well-being. As the case progressed, the Shadow Network's involvement in Millfield continued to evolve, as they worked together with other community members to create a unified response against these criminal activities. They developed partnerships with local law enforcement agencies to strengthen their investigation efforts, collaborated with social media platforms to raise awareness about the issue, and encouraged residents to speak out if they witnessed any suspicious behavior or incidents of harassment. Mark's wife, Emily, was also instrumental in spearheading this effort, as she played a critical role in building trust between the Shadow Network, local law enforcement agencies, and her neighbors. She recognized that community involvement was essential for addressing the complex issues facing Millfield and worked tirelessly to promote collaboration among all stakeholders. Through their combined efforts, the Shadow Network successfully brought about positive changes within the neighborhood of Millfield, including a reduction in drug-related activity, increased awareness about harassment and intimidation, and improved trust between residents. Not only did this restore peace and harmony to the community, but also helped shape its future by fostering a more inclusive and welcoming environment for all members. As Mark sat back in his backyard once again, reflecting on their journey so far, he couldn't help but feel grateful for the opportunity to work alongside the Shadow Network as they fought against crime and corruption. He knew that his experience had prepared him well for whatever challenges lay ahead, knowing that justice could be served not just for himself and Emily, but for all residents of Mill. Mark sat back in his backyard, exhausted from the grueling task of tracking down the culprits behind last week's attack on Emily. The incident had left him shaken and reeling from the aftermath, but he knew that they needed to move forward with renewed determination. As the sun began its descent over Millfield, Mark made a decision to confront his estranged son, Alex, who was now living in San Francisco and had been involved in some shady dealings. He approached his son's apartment door slowly, his heart pounding with anticipation. "Alex," he said, trying not to let the tension between them escalate, "I need you to come home right away." His son hesitated for a moment before finally answering, his voice trembling slightly. "What do you want me to do?" Mark took a deep breath and explained the situation. He had discovered that Emily's attackers were two men who claimed to be from the Shadow Network, an organization dedicated to fighting against crime and corruption within their community. They'd been hired by someone with information about the attack on Emily, but they didn't have enough evidence to prove it. Alex listened intently as Mark described the events leading up to last week's incident, his eyes narrowing in concern at each detail. He knew that he had a responsibility to turn himself over to law enforcement and help bring them to justice for what their actions had caused so much pain and suffering. "Are you sure this is right?" Alex asked finally, his voice rising with determination. "I've been involved in some shady dealings myself." Mark shook his head firmly, determined not to let the fear of retribution cloud his judgment.